I am Peru. What Israel is doing right now with Gaza, I don't go first by Judges, chapter 19, verse 21, that Jehovah himself commands them to go to war. What fault did the children have? What fault did the elders who didn't participate have? The conclusion I've come to is that in the pursuit of justice, innocent people also die. Always for wanting to destroy a group that might be like Shining Path, like right now with Hamas, or because of what was happening in the city of the Benjaminites. How can the death of children or elders be justified at this moment, being caused by the Israeli army to the Gazans?
I understand. I don't want to justify anything. I want to explain. The first thing is that the scene you mentioned, in Hebrew we call it Pilegesh Bagiva. That's what that episode is called in the Tanakh. It's very realistic. So you say that in the process of wars, innocent people die. Is there a single war in history where innocent people haven't died? No, right? First, second, in the case of Peru, Peru made efforts to ensure that the civilian population was not affected.
Look, maybe I don't know so many details, so much about history, because maybe I didn't go through that part of history and I haven't read some books either. But the little information I have from the history my parents told me is that, the little information, it's that sometimes they had to go with Shining Path because they were taken, and sometimes they went with the army. They didn't have a choice sometimes. So the army would come and in the end kill them, and it wasn't their fault. No, so that's why what I think. The doubt I have is that in the name of justice, there are always innocent people. Innocent people.
And of course, there's no war in human history where innocent people don't fall. But what I want to say, first of all, I don't think children should suffer. I think children should be out of the equation. The reality is that in wars, children suffer. Now, the case of Gaza is an exceptional case in the wars of human history. I don't think any army on the planet in history has faced a war like the one we are in Israel. The factors are that we have a large number of people kidnapped in the same territory as ours. Plus, it's one of the densest urban areas for combat. Plus, it's a radical Islamist group whose military strategy is to use the civilian population as a political tool. Why? Because they will never ever defeat Israel with weapons. They don't have the military capability, but they do have the ability to damage Israel's political image and pressure Israel so that Israel might give in to Hamas's demands. That's why the strategy of using the civilian population is one of Hamas's tools. It's not just me saying this. Hamas spokespersons, Sinwar, Ismail Haniya, and other leaders have all said it. Even the children are used for this cause. Another factor in the equation is that Israel, despite all this, is in a war. There is no nation in the world that has ever been in a situation like this. So much so that the international pressure on Israel is unmatched. I don't know of a single conflict in history where a country has faced more pressure than Israel. We're discussing how 60 conflicts are happening worldwide right now, yet few people mention them. Did you hear that hundreds of Christians are being killed in Congo just this week? Did anyone hear about that? And in Nigeria, did you hear about it? No one heard about that either. And in Myanmar, do you know about the war that's happening right now? Did you know there was a war and that there's a country called that? It's not exceptional. And Israel? What really holds Israel back is the international pressure. And here I start adding things up. As a chemical engineer, I have the data on my desk and I start to look at it. If Israel is under international pressure, why would they want civilians to be harmed? What interest does Israel have in causing civilian casualties? None. On the contrary, if civilians are harmed, that hurts Israel. Israel has to take action, and the actions Israel takes are to bring in 1,500 tons of humanitarian aid. Pounds, that's what they call it in France, Brazil, even Latin America. That's what I'm saying, Of the children who have fallen in the war in Gaza, we really don't know how many have fallen, because the numbers we have are the numbers given by Hamas, It's the Ministry of Health in Gaza. They're part of their media strategy. And here I want to mention something you brought up. How many did you say? That the ratio of civilians to terrorists who died in the Shining Path exists.
an average between 45 to 50%, because not all the people the army killed were from the shining path.
It means that for every civilian, 1.2 civilians died. We're talking about a much more conventional war than what Israel is facing. What's happening in Israel is that Israel's record is a similar ratio of 1 to 1.2, that for every terrorist, one civilian. The data, and anyone who has seen the data, and I have a video on the subject, the peak of the majority of the concentration of people by age are men of combat age, between 20 and 40 years old, 20 to 30 years old. And it's the largest number of people who have fallen in Gaza, and the same data from Hamas shows that 71% of the people are of this type. Apparently, they are not civilians. So if you look further into the data, of course, there are civilians who suffer. The question is, what measures are being taken to prevent this from happening? And what measures are the others taking to make sure this does happen? Because it's precisely Hamas who do want people to die. So I would answer that by asking if Israel is going to bring justice, and along the way, also, we are worried because we don't want things to get as bad as possible, unlike our enemies who do, since that's their only strategy against us. But let's see.
Another question, another question, because of course I've never been to Israel. I don't know it either. I've only had the chance to meet two types of Jews, Sephardites, Sephardim. But considering that in war, logistics is always key. Logistics is key. So how is it that so far Hamas keeps sustaining the war? Does that mean their logistics haven't been cut off? Why is it that Israel, having so much intelligence, still can't detect and cut off their logistics?
Okay, very good question. And I'll ask you a counter question so you can break it down. What does Hamas need to continue its logistics?
What would Hamas need to, as I was saying, I've almost come to a somewhat absurd conclusion. I think that maybe they have tunnels that you guys might not have discovered yet, or I don't know. Or someone has to provide them with weapons. Someone has to provide them, something. Because up until now, the war is still going on. It's moving forward, but that logistics line hasn't been cut. So I start to wonder why. Why can't Israel, with all its technology, cut off the logistics?
So here ends my answer. Israel has never managed to cut off the logistics. In terms of weapons, in terms of the weapons that come in, because when Israel controls Rafah, nothing gets in anymore. Rafah is truly sealed off. No weapons get into Gaza, only if they somehow manage to come in by sea. And that's why there's a naval blockade so that weapons don't reach Hamas. So, in terms of weapons, they have what they had stocked up until now, and it's actually a lot of weaponry they've managed to stockpile. They've spent 20 years preparing for this moment, stockpiling ammunition. That is, they still have enough for a lot of war, but they also have another way, a logistical part, which is resupplying themselves. For example, food, for example, money to pay salaries, for example, communications, for example, these kinds of details. How do they manage them? And here is one of the great failures of nations in their fight, or in their supposed fight, because this is where the conflict ends. And it's that every time Israel sends humanitarian aid to Gaza, the ones who steal the humanitarian aid are Hamas. Hamas always takes the humanitarian aid. They empty the trucks and sell the humanitarian aid so they can finance themselves, and so they can keep the cycle of recruiting and paying salaries and continue like that. The war machine that is sustained by it. These salaries that they take from humanitarian aid mean that in the good faith of wanting to send humanitarian aid and help the people of Gaza, in the end, never. They are the ones who benefit the most every time humanitarian aid comes in. That's why the issue of humanitarian aid channels needs to be fixed. But since the world pressures Israel that we just have to let the trucks in and let things take their course, it's never a problem. So one of the reasons I blame a lot is that the world is largely at fault. That is, the United Nations for pressuring Israel to keep providing humanitarian aid in a stupid and senseless way. I also blame Israel. We should have been much more forceful at the beginning of the war with the conquest of the north, of Gaza and Rafah and all of that. And I think that's the reason, that part of it, Israel being forceful.
The conquest? part of it is Israel, to be more forceful in the war. Gaza. And that is the reason
That yes, great. He's the one from Gaza, and this is the reason. Armed and fighting with Hamas in Gaza, they themselves are from Gaza. Part of Israel than Israel. To be decisive actions in the war with the conquests of Gaza, and this and that. The reason that decisive actions, Gaza, and this is the reason that the part is Israel, that Israel.
to be more part of being more decisive with the conquest of, and